Good morning, everybody. Welcome to the 9:30 a.m. hell slot. Thanks for waking up from your hangover to be here. I'm actually surprised at the turnout. It was better than I thought it would be. So anyway, I'm Dan Helton, and I'm here to tell you everything you never wanted to know about red teaming but have been forced to find out. I only have 30 minutes to do this, and I'm a freaking talker. So I would say please keep your heckles and questions to the end, because I got to be laser focused and whip through this, or else Mr. McCabe is going to be very mad at me for eating into his slot. So anyway, start off, I'm Dan Helton. If you don't know me, I've been around KakalakiCon since its inception. You know, I'm usually hanging out with the CTF team. I'm involved with those guys with OPSEC. There's my social media handles. I very rarely post. I live in southern Indiana, right across the river from Louisville, Kentucky. I moved back just in time for them to cancel DerbyCon, so great. Formerly lived in Durham. Glad to be back always. I have about 10 plus years experience in the realm of pen testing and red teaming, 7 plus of those in consulting. And I probably should add there, about 2.5 of those, I was a regional practice lead for a major cybersecurity consulting firm leading their red teaming practice in North America. Until the layoff Grim Reaper came for me recently, but don't worry, I'm starting a new job Monday, so it's all good. And I'm here to tell you about 10 different things that I've learned over my journey about red teaming that a lot of people don't talk about. So who's this talk for? It's mostly for potential customers. Like if you're looking to engage a company to do red teaming services, here's some like kind of helpful things for you to know. It's also might be of use for you if you're a company that's looking to stand up an internal pen tester red team. You probably find some useful info here. A little bit for those of you who are probably curious about red teaming and wanting to do it, and maybe you want to go work for a consulting firm, or you're in a consulting firm and you want to get in with the red team and you're wondering kind of what it's like. And then also for just some of like morbidly curious red teamers from other companies who are here and kind of wanting to see how the sausage is made at other places. So at least I can give you my perspective from the places I've worked. So very commonly when I was a practice lead, I would get on a scoping call with a client and they'd say the magic words, "I want a red team." Well, do you though? You know, what do you even mean by red team? Because there's a lot of definitions out there. And point number 1 of those 10 things is that red teaming does not equal just pen testing but with stealth. That would seem to be a very common perception amongst practitioners and clients. I think the best definition of red teaming really is from the Red Team Development and Operations book by James Tupperville and Joe Vest. Great book if you're in this realm setting up a team internally or at a consulting firm. Their definition by the book was, red teaming is the process of using tactics, techniques, and procedures, TTPs, that's a very common acronym, to emulate real-world threats with the goal of training and measuring the effectiveness of the people, processes, and technology. Those are 3 very important things. People, processes, technology used to defend an environment. Or to really kind of boil it down, I always say, pen test your systems. It's to look for exploits, it's to chain things together, try to do different stuff like that, show that it's vulnerable. But a red team is there to test your blue team out. It's to see how effective is your security program. Can they successfully detect and respond to a real-world threat? Red teaming is not better than pen testing. That's another false kind of conception, I think. There's definitely progression, right? With a company, when their security program is maturing, they're going to start out with very easy stuff like vulnerability scanning. Then they can kind of progress to penetration testing. They might progress to more like scenario-based kind of pen tests. And then eventually, like once they've built their program up, maybe they've got an in-house SOC or they've got an MSSPs watching their stuff. Then they're kind of in that realm where they're getting ready for red teaming. But just because you mature up to that point doesn't mean you stop doing the other things. Actually, Roxanne Peruz, who's a lady I used to work with, she was one of our salespeople at my last company. She had a great analogy. She said it's like math. It's like you have to know addition and subtraction before you can learn calculus. But just because you know calculus doesn't mean you have to stop knowing how to multiply and divide and do all that stuff. It's still important. It's just you've matured to a point where that's part of the mix. But if you're ready to get red teams, you should still be doing pen tests. You should still be doing Volt scans, all those things. It's just a different aspect of offensive security. Sales and marketing has not really helped with these distinctions because kind of like how pen testing is getting watered down over the years, red teaming is being watered down over the years. And hence why we have to kind of, consulting firms, when we talk to clients, we have to kind of figure out definitions. When a client says they want red teams, is that what they really mean? And then that's also why you'll see some people are moving towards calling it attack simulation, adversary emulation, just to kind of put forward a little bit more that idea of it being simulating real-world threats. So I prefer attack simulation myself. Point number 2 is most places are not ready for red teaming. Very commonly when we'd have a new client would come and say, hey, we'd like to do a red team assessment, you start having that talk with them. You ask them, like, do you have an in-house SOC? Do you have a managed SOC services provider, MSSP, doing anything for you? Do you have a combo of both maybe? How mature is your cybersecurity program? Have you had pen tests before or vulnerability scans? Have you had red teams before or purple teams? And a lot of times they'd be like, no, 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 no. And that's okay. I always tell the salespeople because they kind of get nervous, but I'm like, that's fine. If they're not ready for red teaming, we can always walk them down to whatever's appropriate to them. If it's pen test or vuln scans, and then we can build a partnership and we can build them up. Because if you're going to buy a red team without being ready, it's a complete waste of your time and money, because the red team's going to come in, they're going to stomp your shit into the ground, and you're going to learn nothing from it, because if you don't have defenders watching, it's just kind of pointless. It's just the red team will get to feel really good about themselves, and you'll get to waste a lot of money. So, but there are other adversary simulation services, even if you don't have a SOC, I think you can benefit from, that you can kind of hit the other parts of the people, process, technology triangle with. I'll talk a little bit about that later in the presentation. Number 3 is kind of the dirty secret, is that we don't really simulate real-world threats. I know that might sound like a thermonuclear take, but if you talk to any real red teamer who's honest, they'll kind of be like, yeah, it's true. And it's not that we can't or that we don't. Well, it's more and more that we can't. It's not that we can't for technical or for skill reasons. It's not that we don't want to. It's that there's just certain limitations we have that I'll get into here. I mean, first thing, kind of obvious, is threat actors can break the law, and we can't. They don't have to care about legality. They don't have to care about ethics. They don't have to care about getting sued for impersonating third parties. They do whatever they want to get in, to phish you, or to do whatever. If they can't break into you, they'll break into a partner organization and do a supply chain style attack. Very common with APTs, right? Like SolarWinds. So that's just like one of the obvious things, is we can't break the law. So that's a shackle on us as red teamers trying to emulate threats. Another kind of obvious thing is the time and budget constraints are very different. A cybercrime gang or a nation-state level threat actor, they have totally different, time and budget about how they attack something and how much time they spend, how much effort they spend on it. Whereas you as a client buying an assessment, most assessments are still, time-boxed, point-in-time assessments. It's like, okay, we're going to buy a red team. We're going to be doing it for 4 weeks or 3 months or whatever, and it's just that. Some places are selling more continuous red teaming, which I really like. I was trying to push that in my last job, is get clients into that mix of buying it over an extended realm of time to kind of better emulate that longer time frame that real-world attackers have. But still, most of these things, it's like the client only has so much time and money, and attackers really don't. They can spend as much time trying to hack you as they want. They can get in and then just establish persistence and just sit on their implant for months at a time and wait till your logs roll over and you have no idea how they got in. They can do stuff like that we generally can't because of money. But most importantly, the real reason we can't emulate threat actors is because threat actors are complete opportunists, and yes, even APTs to a lesser degree. And what I mean by that is, they're not looking to challenge themselves, right? They're just, they're obeying the law of the jungle, as my Dwight Worker, who is my professor at Indiana University, always put it. Predators go for the weakest prey. So if you read breach reports and you see the kind of TTPs that real-world threat actors used, even like Russian and Chinese APTs, I look at that and I'm like, oh my God, they use stuff that would get me busted on day one at any one of my clients. And it kind of clicked for me when I realized that. I was like, oh yeah, that's because these are the places that don't invest in red teams and pen tests. That's why they're getting popped by Russia and China. It's because if they were doing all these exercises and investing all this in their security program and in their defenses and in their IR and detection and response, they would be a lot less likely to get hacked because they wouldn't be as attractive of a target. So, that's one thing kind of makes it harder for us because, threat actors, they don't, say, Acme Bank comes to you and says, I want a red team. No threat actor is out there saying like, oh, I'm going to hack Acme Bank. Threat actors are like, I'm going to hack banks, and I'm going to send phishing emails to all of them, or I'm going to use this hot exploit on whatever VPN hardware this week has like a CVSS 10 vulnerability in it, and I'm going to hack them and ransom them or do whatever. Like I said, even APTs are really kind of opportunists to a point because they have a narrower target, right? They're like, okay, we want to go after foreign governments. But it's like, okay, well, if foreign government ministry is too hard to hack, well, we'll hack defense contractors. And now it's gotten to the point that defense contractors are hardened. They're going like third and fourth orders out. I've heard stories about law firms that draft the contracts between a place like Boeing and like the Department of Defense. Like APTs are trying to hack them to try and insert themselves in a supply chain that way. So, that's something that as red teamers, we can't really emulate that opportunism, really. So that's kind of like the biggest thing. But it's a good thing, though, because just like I said, because the fact that you're even investing in red teaming already puts you so far ahead of the pack as far as like not having a breach in the first place. I mean, it doesn't immunize you, but it puts you so far ahead of everybody else. And another thing is that when people are getting red teams, clients really need to think hard about what kind of goals they have in mind for what they want to get out of this. And probably the two common reasons that I had whenever I would talk to clients about these sort of assessments and say, what do you hope to get out of this? The good answer I would put it would be when they say, yeah, we want to see what our defenses are like. We want to test to make sure our our detection and response capability is up there. We want to make sure we could detect a real world bad guy if they got in. Then kind of like the bad reason to get a red team, but I liked it because it was really fun when these happened, was the guy was like, yeah, I know my defenses are crap, but I want to scare my my CIO into like investing more in the blue team. So come in here and like just wreck us and show him how bad it would be if a real threat actor got in here. And so he'll give me money to actually like, invest in tools and hire more people for my SOC. Like I said, it's not like the best reason in the world, but usually for us, it means it's like we're going to have a good time when we get in there, So like, I always love to hear that. I was like, oh, this is going to be a fun one. But I would challenge you as a client, really think about what your worst case scenarios are when you buy these. Do threat modeling. I mean, whether, look at threat intelligence and see what's affecting your industry. Really think about it. Because as I'll get into later, red teamers maybe have some of their own ideas, but you as a customer, you know what's important to you. Is it your client data? Is it your backups? Is it intellectual property? Is it, whatever. What's important to you? Think about that, model that threat, figure out what kind of threat actors are most likely to go after you, and craft a scenario around that. I mean, if you're in just a commercial company, probably ransomware. That's like the biggest thing for the last several years. You're probably terrified that like a ransomware gang is going to get in there and ransom client data or hold your backups hostage or do whatever. If you're in the contracting space or gov space, obviously APTs are a big concern for you. So you need to think about what kind of things you might be holding on to that a foreign government would want to get to, or even like if they would just want to use you as a jumping off point for supply chain attacks. That's another thing to be worried about. I mean, look what happened to SolarWinds, So think hard about those goals, and that way you'll get the most out of your adversary simulation. Another thing, and thank God this is not super common, at least in my experience, but I've had to tell clients, like, this should not be a self-backpatting exercise for your blue team. If you're stacking the deck against the red team and making sure you succeed, and sometimes that happens because there's internal politics at play, sometimes it's who's hiring you isn't involved in the blue team, and the blue team cheats. Like, they find out about the red team assessment, and they do stuff to make themselves look good. But if you're doing that, you're just wasting money, honestly. The red team assessment should be there to challenge your blue team, to seriously see, have they got what it takes? Are they going to be able to detect a real-world bad guy? And if not, where are the gaps at so they can fill those gaps in and be prepared for real-world threats? So I always tell them, keep the scope broad, try to keep your SOC or your MSSPs in the dark as much as possible if you're going full stealth. It's different if you're doing purple team, and I'll get into that. Don't make them act like a real breach. One of my friends was like, hey, we make them call in IR retainers. If that's their protocol for like responding to an incident, we say go that far, like call in your IR retainer if you detect us. Like, treat it like a real world exercise. Don't forget that process part of people, processes, and technology, because that's just as important as like whether the tech, catches you. Is what's the process? Really test out your IR playbooks. Make sure that if a real-world breach happens, that you're going to be able to spring into action correctly. But don't get too hung up on realism, in quotes, I'll say. And by this, I mean, most places are pretty amenable to the assume breach model. They understand it's a time and budget saving, mechanism. And if you're not familiar with that term, assume breach means you just do the red team starting from being inside the network. You skip the initial access phase, so you don't have to phish anybody, or you don't have to go try and find a vulnerable server to exploit or whatever. You start from the perspective of, okay, bad guys have gotten in, what happens now? A lot of times the client will send you a laptop and give you like contractor credentials, or sometimes you'll send them like a C2 implant and they'll run that inside their network and you'll use that. But that's just a way to save money. And I would say push that assume breach model forward more, because another thing we've come across is that like places get really hung up on EDR and like, oh, it keeps catching the implant. Oh, we're good. We've stopped the bad guy. It's like, well, EDR is hard as hell to evade nowadays, and I think anybody who's in red teaming can attest. Like, they spend a lot of time coming up with, like, writing new droppers, finding new obfuscation techniques and things like that in order to, like, get, a Cobalt Strike beacon or a custom C2 beacon to run. Don't get so hung up on that. I would say just for the sake of just getting the most value out of this assessment as you can, I urge people, if you want to have, like, cutting edge, exploits and stuff, that's going to cost you more because that's going to have to pay off a lot of R&D. It's like if we did that for every customer, our day rates would be insane, because anytime you come up with some cutting edge, evasion technique, you have to be faced with the reality that it is very likely going to get burned. And if it gets burned on one assessment, all these EDRs are cloud enabled, it's going to get burned on every assessment now, and you're going to have to go back to the drawing board. So, we save those for like some of like our really big jobs that kind of demand it. But otherwise, if you're just getting like an assumed breach, I would say try some more common evasion techniques with some of the tools out there. Give it a couple of days. If it doesn't work, just whitelist the implant and move forward. Just keep it in monitor mode. Watch what the attacker's doing. Go kind of purple, and then make sure that, like, hey, okay, great, your EDR is good. Your EDR catches stuff. But what about the rest of your detections? Because I've seen a lot of places that put all their eggs in the EDR basket and neglect network detections and other types of, other capabilities. So test those out. It's like, okay, you've seen the implant, great, thumbs up. All right, let's move forward. Can you detect privilege escalation? Can you detect lateral movement? Can you detect when gigabytes of data are leaving the network for some destination? So just extend that assumed breach model and go forward with it, just for the interest of getting the most out of the assessment. And let's see here, okay. And don't be afraid to go purple. In fact, I would say purple teaming is the best thing you can do if you're brand new to this world. You've invested in your detection and response capabilities. You've got a SOC or you got MSSPs or both. You've been through lots of pen tests and vulnerability assessments. You're ready to jump in this world. I'd say do a purple team first off. I think it's the best bang for the buck as far as adversary simulation goes. And there's a couple different ways you can do it. There is kind of the more automated way, which is using a tool like Atomic Red Teams or Caldera. My friend Steve Myrick will be giving a talk on Atomic Red Teams a little bit later today, if you want to see that one. And that's kind of a more automated approach where you're going to kind of run through a script of what an attacker would do, and you're seeing, like, are you detecting it or not? That's kind of like the level one. The next kind of purple teaming is the collaborative exercise, where a red team will come and sit down with your blue teamers, and you might share a screen with them, and they'll run through the attacks, and in real time, the blue team can observe and see, okay, they just got initial access. Did we see anything? Did we detect that? If we did detect it, how was it categorized in severity? Is it going to get investigated, or is it like way down the list as a low severity finding, and then we're not going to even look at it? Those are really great. Blue teams love it because they get a peek into how the sausage is made. Red teams like it because it's a lot less stress. You can just kind of do your thing. You can watch. You can see in real time how things are going. And then the third type, I would say, is more like the after-action review style purple team, which back when I was leading a practice, we would do those as their own exercises. But more commonly, if we had like a full stealth red team, if we got caught in the middle, we would just transition to kind of that style of purple team. And by the after-action review, I mean you kind of go over the attack with the blue team and say, hey, we did all these things. Here's the timeline of all the actions we took. Let's take a look. Did you detect all these? How are they categorized? Are you getting too much noise in your console that, like, this event happened and it's just lost in the sauce? How can we make this more impactful? We would sometimes do exercises where the red team would come in for a couple weeks, and then we would have like an IR analyst join the client's blue team and then do the after-action review. Or, like I said, sometimes it's like if the red team just gets busted in the middle, we'll just transition to purple in order to get the most out of it and give them good value for their money. And then for you kids out there who are, looking to get into this world, the biggest thing I would say is that red teaming is not all sexy elite hacksawying. It's a lot of reading SharePoint. There is, you get into this, you'll get to do cool stuff. You'll get to write like implants and droppers and cool stuff like that and do neat things. But a lot of a red team is much more about having a certain mindset when it comes into it. And it's not all cool hacks. It's like you're trying to do what a real world attacker would do and go after the things a real world attacker would want to go after. And so that means, like, when you're in an environment, you're going to be constantly thinking about what is your goal in mind. Because kind of the pen tester thing is, I just want to get DA or whatever. And it's like, if you're in a real world attacker, you might not care about that. You don't have to get DA if all of the credit card data you're trying to steal is like sitting right there in a public SMB share. You know, it's like you don't need DA for that. You just need to get that stuff out without getting busted. You have to constantly be thinking about more milspeak terms, because obviously red teaming comes out of like the military world of the 1960s. You have to think about your OPSEC, your operational security, basically like not getting caught, not getting busted, and then also situational awareness. What is going on in the network around you, and how can you act in a way that's not going to stick out as an anomaly and be detectable? So that means like, yeah, you could, you know, dump SAM and then just pass the hash all around the environment and stuff, you know, moving that way, you know, with like freaking SMB or whatever. You know, and that'll stick out like a sore thumb. Or, you know, you could just steal creds and RDP into stuff like a normal person, and then that's not going to like raise hackles at all if it's a normal type of user who's allowed to do that and normally does RDP into servers. You know, so you have to think about those things. You have to move a lot slower. You have to endeavor to blend in. And then also soft skills are very important, especially if you're going to be doing the social engineering aspects of this, like doing phishing, or if you're moving into the physical space. It's very important to have those soft skills, and that's one of the harder things that like you can only train somebody up on so much. Some of it does kind of have to be inherent within, and you know, if that's not your forte, that's okay. Honestly, if you're someone to do cool hacks, you'll probably have a better time just doing internal network pen tests. You'll have a lot more fun time because you'll be a lot less under the gun and a lot less worried about stealth, and you'll just get to hack all the boxes and pop all the shells. So just think about that. If this is a world that you're thinking about getting into, just be aware of those realities. And like I was talking about before, there are certain things in the adversary simulation world you can do, even if you're not at the level of being ready for a red or purple team. And I think phishing and vishing are really important, but you need to do them correctly. So I would still get clients who come to me and say, yeah, we want to do a phishing exercise. We'll give you 1,000 emails, you know, send a couple, 2 or 3 pre-text emails and give us metrics on how many people click through. I'm here honestly to tell you that if you're hiring a consulting firm to do that, you're probably wasting money, because you can, if you're like a Proofpoint or a Microsoft customer, you can basically get that for free. And also there's firms that specialize in that stuff, right? There's places like KnowBe4 that do nothing but that, and they'll probably be a lot cheaper and more effective than a consulting firm that's, you know, going to charge you a lot to do this kind of stuff. What you should be asking consulting firms to do is to do phishing more along the lines of like, make it more red teamy. I always encourage clients, look at business email compromise. That is big money cybercrime. The FBI's Internet Crime Complaint Center, the IC3, they just a couple months ago released their 2023 data in their Internet Crime Report. And there were 2 types of cybercrime that were in the billion with a B dollars of losses reported for 2023. The first one was investment scams, commonly known as pig butchering. That was like number 1, and it had just unseated BEC, or business email compromise. Business email compromise had been number 1 for a long time. It slipped to number 2. But business email compromise in 2023 was responsible for $2.9 billion in losses to companies and individuals. So then those were the only 2 that were $1 billion. So this is something like you definitely need to be testing against. And you don't have to have a fancy SOC to test for business email compromise, because remember, it's people, processes, and technology. When you forget about the technology, test the people and processes. You know, if somebody emails you and tells you to do a wire transfer, you know, what's the process? How do you validate it? How do you make sure that that's really, you know, the C-suite that asked you to do that, or it's really the real person? Vishing, similarly. What's your process at your help desk if somebody calls up and says, oh, I need a password reset, or I need to get a new MFA token registered because I dropped my phone in the ocean or whatever. You know, what is your process for validating them and making sure it's the real person? We're seeing a lot more vishing now. MGM and Caesars last year had really big hacks from Scattered Spider, and my pet theory is that they're moving to vishing because email phishing is so hard now, because there's so many, you know, technologies and detections and spam filters and all that stuff to get through, that they finally figured out, oh, if I just call the help desk and ask for a password reset and I BS my way through the security questions, they'll do it for me, and then I can just log in. So test those out. Make them more red teamy. Really go after a real goal. Don't just be like, go for how many people click the link or how many people open the attachment. Go for like, hey, try to spoof an executive and see if you can get a wire transfer approved. You know, try to see if you can get people to disclose information about individuals over the phone, things like that. Go for those rather than bulk. Bulk assessments are okay. It's fine for user education, but there's just a point at which you reach diminishing returns with that kind of assessment. And I think you should really be pushing it more in a red teamy kind of direction. And then my final closing one I will say is physical assessments are also great. People have totally forgotten about these. A little bit of shots fired here as I say that a lot of consultancies suck at doing them. Not Core Group. If you hire Deviant Olem here in the audience to do it, you'll get a great assessment. But the problem is that a lot of places, it's just kind of an afterthought, and it's cybersecurity people doing it, whereas in the real world, your cybersecurity folks and your physical security folks are separate. Like the guy that is in charge of like the badge readers and the security cameras, he's in a totally different division of the business. He doesn't report to the CISO. He's like part of like facilities or something like that. They're totally different worlds. It opened my eyes about 10 years ago. I went to an IC Squared Congress in Chicago, and that's the people that grant the CISSP certification. And they were doing a joint conference with ASIS, which is basically like their counterpart in the physical security world. They're the ones that deal out the big deal certifications for like physical security practitioners. And it never occurred to me that like, wow, those really are just totally separate worlds. So a lot of times it gets tacked on as kind of a cool guy thing. It's like, oh, we'll break into the building and put a box on the network, and then we'll do a red team from there. It might be a limited value because since COVID, obviously, a lot of places have moved to work from home. A lot of places are getting rid of their office spaces. I'm not convinced a lot of places it was worth it anyway, because we were getting like a lot of tech firms that they just rent office space and they have no say over the badge readers or how the doors are hung or anything. I mean, they could take our report and go complain to the property manager, but like they don't really have much of any ability to fix any of it themselves. So that's also a problem in consulting, and that was something I was trying to do, was trying to market to more places that would benefit from this, places with physical facilities like hospitals, manufacturing, logistics. Even banks can benefit from it to a degree too, and the cyber part. But places that may not be good red team traditional candidates, because a lot of those places don't have great cybersecurity, but they have physical property to protect, and they can benefit from those kinds of assessments. But like I said, a lot of places just kind of, it's very slapdash. I was actually talking to Deviant about it last night. It's like we saw so many places, like we try to sell an assessment where like we do really hardcore recon. We come up with this really, good pretext to get in the building. We'd have very clear goals about what kind of information we're going to get. A lot of other places would just come in, like one-day assessment, they'll tailgate somebody in, they'll pick a lock, or they'll use a UDT because it looks cool, and then they'll say ta-da, and the executives will clap. But you've not learned anything from that, because it's like, okay, tailgating, what am I supposed to do? I'm going to whack everybody with a stick if they hold the door open. I mean, it's a human nature. I'm not going to be able to fight that very much. I can educate users all day, but people are still going to hold doors open for people. It's about what do you get out of it? What are the layers of defense? Okay, somebody can get in the building, and then what? How's the internal security of the building? Are sensitive places inside the building, closed off behind their own badge readers? Is it totally flat? Are people putting things away? Are file cabinets locked? There again, just like with a lot of other security, it's about your defense in depth. So don't forget about physical security. It's slowly making a comeback since COVID, but really talk to your vendor about like what's important. And it might not be the cyber stuff. I had a good friend said they had a hospital hired them, and they were just concerned about putting a box on the network. And he's like, you're a hospital. You have cabinets full of opioids. Your real threat actor is some dude who's going to come and try to steal drugs. It's like, I don't think anybody's going to come in here and put boxes on the network. So, if you have a physical facility protect, be thinking about that. Get your mind out of just cyber and think about what other threats there are out there. And I have managed to make it on time. I'm very proud of myself, actually. So thank you for listening to me rant about the state of adversary simulation.